In Mark's Gospel, the disciples come across as rather dim-witted. Repeatedly, as in today's passage, Jesus says, "Do you not yet understand?" Now this happens just after Jesus tells them that he'll be betrayed, killed, and then rise again. They just don't get it. And to make matters worse, they then have an argument over who among them is the greatest. They're preoccupied with status. And this is just after Jesus has talked to them about things like suffering, self-sacrifice, and service. So he sits them down and has a discipleship tutorial. Now, before we write off the disciples as being somewhat limited, remember Mark is writing not only for first century Christians, but also for the generations to come. So when he talks about disciples, we need to count ourselves in. He's inviting us to follow Jesus and to keep following him, even though we often misunderstand what it's all about. The disciples struggled to come to terms with what it means to follow Jesus. But this is actually good news. If they found it tough and sometimes confusing, then it's not surprising if we find it rather challenging. I don't always know where Jesus is taking me and what he wants of me, and I frequently fail in my discipleship. And I guess it's like that for you. It's then we remember these dim-witted disciples whom Jesus stuck with and whom God used to spread the good news. You see, God never gives up on us. We keep getting invited to follow Jesus even when we misunderstand him and get it wrong. It's a picture of God's wonderful belief in us. It's not surprising that the disciples didn't always get it, because Jesus' teaching turned their understanding of life on its head. The disciples have been arguing about who will be the greatest, and Jesus says, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." His understanding of greatness is the very opposite to how society understands it. His definition challenges a fundamental assumption about what it means to get on in life, about prestige and self-worth. He explained it by using a child as a teaching aid. Then he took a little child, put it among them. Taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Now we may see this as a rather cute scene, a child on Jesus' knees with his arms around her. But when he acted out this parable, it would have been startling, even shocking. You see, children were the lowest and the least. They were the most vulnerable of society. Fewer than half of the children born made it to adulthood. Children were generally the first to die when disease or famine struck, or if the family became refugees, and a great many did. It's a scene we see being repeated today as families flee war-torn regions. Children were and are the most vulnerable, and in the ancient world, as in many places today, they had no rights and no status. There was no children's commissioner to protect their interests. They were the insignificant ones, and it's one of these that Jesus takes into his arms. Jesus is saying that we, as his followers, are to welcome and embrace the insignificant ones in our society, those who have no influence or status, those that society readily discounts. He's also saying that as we welcome them, we welcome him, but not just him, but also God who sent him. We're being encouraged to reach out and accept the outsider, to accept the last, the lost, and the least, people who many consider beyond the bounds of normal society, whatever that is, people beyond our own circle of friends. Yes, it takes us beyond our social comfort zone and leads us to relate to those we wouldn't normally relate to. I was encouraged by a writer who was struggling with the impact of this teaching on his life, and he relates an experiment he undertook. Whenever I'm repulsed, he said, by a homeless person who loiters near our home, or nurse a grudge against a friend who spurned me, or envy someone more successful than I am, I try to picture that person as a little child. I then find it easier to welcome or receive them only as a precious human being, rather than someone who can help or harm me, as someone I might ignore, fear, or flatter. The simple act of welcoming another person in that way, Jesus says, is to welcome him and in turn to welcome God the Father who sent him. Similarly, to become or imitate children as Jesus commands is to understand our own selves in the same manner, not as people whose significance rests in titles, honours, successes or failures, as if those might gain or deny our favour with God and people, but in the knowledge that we are human beings loved by God. That, says Jesus, is the only way to experience the presence of his kingdom. The Message paraphrases Mark's words like this. Jesus put a child in the middle of the room. Then, cradling the little one in his arms, he said, "Whoever embraces one of these children as I do, embraces me, and far more than me, God who sent me." What would our lives look like if we acted on this teaching? How is God calling you to embrace the vulnerable ones, to accept and to love them in this way? What does it mean for this parish and our priorities in the future? I wonder.